Good
Hello.
morning or
Morning.
afternoon.
Morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
Oh, nice to meet you today. Great.
Yes, yes. I have not opened the questions yet. I'll just share. Um, I believe you did send them. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would suggest us just to follow the flow of the discussion in this way.
Okay.
It
Okay, sure.
it isn't important. So let's trust
Okay.
trust the
Okay.
flow. Thanks for first of all, thank you for your time and for agreeing to be the first from Canada to conduct this interview, and I hope that this will be the first start of lots of discussions. And I just wanted to share with you an absolutely wonderful story. We met today with the professional storyteller from Cork, from Ireland, and
Okay.
yes, so they have this Irish name Shankies, so that's the tellers of the stories, and
Oh,
uh,
very interesting.
she shared lots of stories. So they are based on myths, they are based on the history of the places, and they are
Hmm.
also, so she also works as a weaver. So she creates the space of co-creating the stories in the reconciliation processes, in
Oh,
working with the teams in corporate sector, and in finding some ways to move forward for the social development in order to connect people in the communities. And so lots of intersections, and it was so wonderful, and she was so inspired by our idea of changing and transforming the cities, not through this straightforward social development way, but through vivid
okay.
the stories, through sensing it, through connecting people to one each other. So we spoke a lot about connection, that stories can help us connect with our own course, with each other, and with people in the community, with our neighbors, and of course with the land where we live. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
in this case, I wanted just to share this experience. It was absolutely wonderful, and to talk to you today, to speak with you about your connection to this land. We discussed with you that you wanted to share your experience of living in the western coast of Canada.
Yes.
Could you please share, first of all, what's your story of this in this place? So how are you connected to it, given the fact that you are originally from other places? So how
Hmm.
that you found your home here?
Thanks for that. And my answer will be more of a weaving of different aspects that may present as disjointed, but it's also because of the different elements that I think inform my um, ancestral journey, which has formed in the memory of that created by my parents sharing of their stories and then bringing those together to understand identity and place. So, in terms of place, I was born in Toronto, Canada, so the East. But because my father was in the Yukon, Whitehorse, Yukon, so the west of Canada, from the 1950s, so from he was about 17 years old, he had left Germany. And my father's a little bit older, so he had lived through the war as a child and was in a camp for 2 years in Denmark. So he brings all these stories of being, becoming a refugee. After that, seeing, quite a lot of devastation, and there's a ton of stories of survival, of how he and his siblings survived. So I mention that because, if you study genetics, all this informs many things in terms of the lenses through which we see and understand the world and react, perhaps sometimes, or choose to respond. And how that all shaped him. Of course, we all make choices, and so we choose to respond. How that all shaped him is he went to the Yukon to become a wildlife photographer. And so he spent much of his time in the bush. And so soon after I was born, he met my mom in Jamaica, in Toronto, but she came from Jamaica. They, all the three of us and my baby brother at that time went up to the Yukon. And so that's where I was raised. That's where I feel strongly connected to in terms of the land. I still feel, even though it's been many decades now that I'm on this earth, I still feel that that is my home. And largely too, because wherever I've been in the world, I go back to the Yukon every summer and spend typically, not so much lately, but I go back every summer now. It's just weeks, but it used to be months that I would spend. So it's always been home. And because my father was a wildlife photographer, I was always in the bush and very much connected to the land, very much connected to all that creates the senses that connects you to the land. So the smells are always familiar of the plants and the earth. And there's another place where I grew up there, which is called Atlin, on Atlin Lake. And we had, up until 2 years ago, a property there on the lake where my father had built the cabin. And it's a place where you don't have running water. You have to gather the water from the lake, and there's an outhouse and that kind of thing. But we also spent our summers there from childhood, from I was about 4 and up until 2 years ago. So that's where I'd always be. So this land informs my sense of connection to the rest of the world as well. So that is my reference point. In addition to my parents' stories of their families, of course, I told a little bit about my father's ancestry and in terms of his experiences that shaped him, which shaped me. But also my mom coming from Jamaica. She comes from a part of Jamaica in the mountains where, I mean, she was born in St. Catharines, but her parents, which is close to where her parents come from, that spot it's not, I wouldn't call it famous, because there's many stories that are marginalized in the history, but it's famous in the sense that when Columbus came to the West, he actually went to Jamaica. He didn't even he didn't even set foot in the north. Of course, his ship did, but the journey of colonization actually began in the Caribbean. And so from the time that he set foot in Jamaica, um, colonization began then with the Spanish and then with the British. And there's one spot in the mountains where resistance began, and that is in the area where my mother's parents come from. And the history goes well, way back as well. So about 4 generations back, my great grandmother was a slave. Her her son lived to 107 and was also in the house with my mom. So there's a ton of stories that are passed down. And um, the man that enslaved her eventually married her, and he was a Brit. And there's powerful families within Jamaica. So his family would have been one of about three that were very powerful at the time. And that's in the 18th century, but that carries over, even though slavery was banned, the practice still carried over. And so within that area, there is what's called the Maroon, and the Taino live in many spaces, but the Taino had fled to that spot as well. And there were civil wars twice within that area. So my family didn't escape, um, but many families did end up escaping and creating their own little town, which exists as a governorate up until today. So they govern their own space. So I have a lot of relatives who live just outside what's called Maroon Town. So they live about 10 minutes drive outside of that. And my my great grandfather had done, they used to have little farms there as well. But with IMF policies and IMF changes, that had all been disrupted. So I mention that also because I haven't done much research or work around that area, but I'm feeling more so a tug to be doing a little bit more of an investigation. And yeah, that also informs, I think, a lot of stories and a lot of choices and practices that come from a sense of being colonized in that space. And that has different impacts in different ways, which I won't go into detail with. But this is my mother and this is my father. My mom, being Jamaican, was interesting growing up because there were only a few others in the little space, the little town that I grew up in called Whitehorse, which now has about 35,000 people. And yeah, is a very white town, except for, of course, we have a strong indigenous presence. And so within this space or the land, I connect very much in my identity to the place because it's where I grew up. It's where I went to school from kindergarten till I graduated. I did my first 2 years of college there before most people have to leave to continue their education. And so that was the reason I did. I went to Germany after that. And I've lived in 6 countries altogether, but I've now resettled. It's been, what, I think about 8 or 9 years back on the West Coast, where I call home now. And this is on, I'll share where I'm located, my home, where I'm often connecting to students from and working from is the Wasanish traditional family lands. Whereas in the Yukon, I grew up on the Kwanlin um, nation's lands. So I'm I'm connected to these lands to some degree in that this is very familiar because it's not far from the Yukon. It's about 2 hours flight, so it is far. But in comparison to the rest of Canada, it's pretty close, and there's many similarities to home on the West Coast where I am. But I'm still learning about the plants. I'm still learning the names of the different trees and that kind of thing. It's less familiar in that sense, but right now it is home.
Beautiful. You know, you mentioned that you lived in 6 different countries, yeah, throughout
Hmm.
your life. So what makes this West Coast region, I would say, different? What gives you this sense of uh, home, and what is so dear for you? Of course, that's the land where you spent your
Mm.
childhood, and it's so sort of nostalgia and something like that. But
Yeah.
in addition to this, you have lots of experience to compare. So what makes it so important for you?
Mm. Um, I think a couple of things. One is it's where I originally felt home. Uh, and home is for me where the land feels very familiar in terms of the smells, the senses, everything. It's where I feel I'm connected to, as as you could describe in a metaphor as having an umbilical cord with. But it's also because this is where my parents continue to live, and whenever I'm anywhere and I think about what I miss most, it's my family. It's not just the land. And so my geographical, spatial connection in terms of that orientation is that's where my family is. My dad did pass away in 2018, so 7 years ago, but my mom is still alive and in the north. And so family creates an understanding and sense of home. It's also the space where I try to create a sense of home for my children because we lived all over the place, and I wanted them to feel a connection to the space that I know most, which is here and where my family was. And during the summers, especially my dad, and my mom, of course, but my dad would try to teach them the things that he taught me. And so that connection in terms of the learning and the knowledge and the wisdom was passed down within the space.
Mhm.
So they connect to the space as home as well.
Mhm. What was it, this wisdom? Because again, this such a diverse background in terms of lots of cultures, so mixture
Yes.
of different bloods. Um,
Yeah.
and at the same time, what is this wisdom which belongs to this place and which your father and you are
Hmm.
thinking that it is so important for children
Hmm.
and for other people to maybe to understand or even to share with other people throughout of the world. What is it?
Hmm. So although I don't have any, hmm, I'm not indigenous or anything like that. I from the global north. I I grew up quite informed by indigenous wisdom and the Yukon in general. I don't know what the percentage is, but when I was growing up, 37% of people are indigenous in the Yukon. So the influence is quite strong, and the connection to nature and understanding and worldview of the role nature plays is quite, I would say, quite different to a Western mindset. And the appreciation and the gratitude and just that understanding of connection is articulated in so many different ways without naming it or putting words to it. It's just a way of being. Um, in other words, you don't even see yourself separate from nature. It's all the same. And I think that context influences a person if you're connected to nature. I mean, there's a lot of people who come up, I would remember they'd come up and they'd leave after a few years because it's a harsh environment. So if you don't connect, then you're missing a reason for being there. And we connected quite strongly because my father was a wildlife photographer. So the essence of connection, the learning that was passed down in that sense was quite strong. And again, that was informed, I understand, because of all that my father went through in his childhood. So instead of looking at the world as evil, he tried to capture the beauty and share it with others. So he'd take films or photographs, and he was actually quite well known at a certain point, and his work was also published in various spaces as well. But just that influence of connecting and appreciating nature was there. Of course, I learned it's kind of funny because I'm watching the series, I don't know if you know it, called Alone, where individuals are put in different spaces, like in the Arctic spaces, to survive. And, whoever lives the longest, and typically that's just a few months, wins a certain amount of money. And I'm just observing, of course, these are experts in what they do. Um, I'm just observing the challenges and thinking, but some of that stuff was normal for me growing up, like hunting food. And if you're out in the bush and you have very little, you're relying on catching food, or finding food or harvesting and that kind of thing. So I think I have, I wouldn't say a ton, but in comparison to the population, quite a strong understanding of how to survive to to some degree, like a few weeks maybe, not months or anything like that. But yeah, so when I just reflect when I watch that show that, well, I grew up with some of this knowledge as just given. And I think with that knowledge, it makes you feel even more connected, and it gives you a deeper appreciation of the dangers and the beauty at the same time.
Mm,
So yeah, that's the knowledge that's passed down. And with that, that's all contextualized in a sense of reverence and respect. So I remember once walking with my dad in the woods. This was in Atlin, and this is all wilderness where there's bears, and we'd encounter bears quite often. I asked him, do you believe in God? Because my mom had just become a Christian, or she had just she just started going to church at least. She was always a Christian. And so I was curious about his beliefs, and he said, well, God is everywhere. He's here in the wilderness. This is part of God. And so that worldview, even though he's coming all the way from Germany, and if Germany is originally Lutheran, for the most part, for most people. This was his worldview, and these kinds of things are not just passed down in terms of practices of how to live within the wilderness, but the thoughts and beliefs and ways of just connecting to nature on a spiritual level were also passed down.
mm. That's beautiful. And speaking about people, so you mentioned that more than 30% of population of these lands is indigenous. So have you had uh, connections, or maybe even friends in your childhood and your adolescence, with these representatives of this natives of this land, of people who lived, and who has ancestors who have been living there for centuries, for
Hmm.
thousands
Of
of
course,
years?
all my friends were indigenous.
And could you maybe remember some stories or something which could illustrate this different point of view of to nature, to relationships, to other people?
It's
What?
interesting because when we were growing up, I think there was less articulated for many, many reasons. For many reasons. It's just a way of being. It's not a whole lot is taught. However, we would get together with the elders, and I would learn to sew. I would learn how to do the beading. These were just like, nobody talked about this is why you're doing, like, you just do it. And so I learned these kinds of things just from being with the elders. And um, like, my parents were friends with Indigenous families, their children. One of my best friends growing up, we were close growing up, and then their children are. best friends with my children. So it's intergenerational where our connections have been strong, but in terms of the teachings, it's really about some of the practices like the sewing, um, some of the practices like hunting, how to do hunting in the cleanest, fastest, most respectful and honoring way and using everything. Whereas maybe other people may not use, and you see people hunting without a purpose of survival or food. Sometimes people come up and hunt and just want to show off how big of a game they were able to find and this kind of thing. So there's no, for me, there wasn't a specific teaching around these that were passed down. It was just simply being in the context to understand worldviews of respect and honoring and gratitude and ensuring that when you hunt or you take a life or you gather anything, you connect, you introduce yourself, you say who you are, whether mentally or in words, and you give gratitude. You're the daughter of so and so, and you're here to gather food, or you're here to hunt, and you're grateful to that soul or that spirit. So it's just examples are hearing.
Hmm.
And so
What
that
was the yes, yes, continue.
so that it's something that I carry with me. I continue to. So, even if I catch a crab now. So that was out of catching crab is here on the West Coast. That's what I do sometimes on the weekends. Um, and we don't like where I was, there were no crab because this is by the ocean here. And so that past, I take this forward anytime I take a crab, or any, little life. I give a lot of gratitude for the sustenance now that I'm able to have as a result.
Hmm. So your parents were sort of outlanders, from your father from Europe, mom from Jamaica, and was there any understanding of representation of different cultures, or somehow comparing? Was there a sense of these different civilizations which are meeting together during your childhood or young adult years? So
Hmm.
how you felt this?
I would say in the Yukon, there's a high level of integration just because of, um, I don't know what the actual influencers are, but the Yukon is highly integrated versus other parts of Canada where people are very, very segregated and quite isolated. So for example, where I am right now, I have colleagues talking about connecting with Indigenous peoples, which is in terms of reconciliation, um, what needs to happen. But that languaging of we need to connect is so weird when I hear it because I grew up with those connections very embedded within families, and very strong. So it's strange. It's just strange languaging. And yeah, it's just a different worldview where I am now as a result, whereas people were quite integrated. My mom was probably, there were three other blacks in Whitehorse. So it was a man and wife, and one of my best friends' dad. Her father was Jamaican, her mother was German, so the other way around. Um, but it was maybe it's because it was cold and it's a smaller population. It's not a typical place where people go to start their lives if they're coming from a warmer country. Now we've got a much greater mix of people for various economic and other reasons. But growing up, she's still integrated quite well with everyone else. And I don't know to what degree that may have happened so easily in other spaces. But in the Yukon, it's just the context that facilitates that. My father being German, there's a lot of Germans in that space. Germans are everywhere. Um, but he had a lot of friends who were German. And when he was out in the bush quite a bit, I remember him telling several stories. I know one story he talked a lot about is he had spent 3 months in the winter. And when I say winter, we're talking about like -40. And this wasn't in the north of the Yukon, on top of it, with his brother when they were very young, doing photography, and another Indigenous fellow. So I think a lot of the learnings and wisdoms are from being with people. So in this harsh environment, when this was before I was born, he would have learned quite a bit. And he did share that he learned a lot from Indigenous people from just spending extended periods of time together. And at that time, if you're spending 3 months in the bush away from any city or contact, he had to survive off the land. And again, when I think about these sensational series on TV, well, this is 3 months in the winter. Like I know he caught a moose at that time. They caught a moose. He was wise to know you need to bring in a lot of fat. So if you have any weight that you are able to bring in, so if you're dropped in by a float plane or whatever, what you can bring in is warm things and fat because you can survive that way and hunt. So these are the kinds of things he did. Um, so yeah, both my parents integrated with the local Indigenous community very well, very strongly, and my mom has quite a few friends. She continues to, and her friends would look out from the Indigenous communities. They would look out for my children as well, in many different senses. So it's a strong community that they built since they've been there for decades. So they're very integrated, very well connected, so that I remember this was some years ago when my daughter was, how old was she? I think 12. She won some big international, not international, Canadian award, and she had to travel to Ottawa to talk a little bit about it. And I just remember my mom saying, "Oh, don't worry, so and so is on the plane with them." And it's a family friend from way, way back, one of my mom's friends. So this is how people connect and interact. So I didn't have to worry at all. I knew that she would take care of my daughter, just being on the same envoy of people going to present this award. And yeah, so these connections are really important because they create a sense of family.
No, that's great because I had these conversations with the guy from Australia who said that he also, so this story is about the northwestern coast of Australia with lots of indigenous people, but he highlighted that so they contacted, they played sports together, but mostly those people uh, were so they started live this sort of Western life, and it's a huge problem because those Aboriginal peoples, they start feeling disconnected from
Mm-hmm.
communities and also from land because this imposed Western way of
Mm-hmm.
in sort of so-called civilization and
Mm-hmm.
way of schooling, it somehow destroys this
Yeah.
indigenous aboriginal understanding of living. And the same story was from the guy from Kenya, and he told me that originally they were living in communities where everybody supported each other, and they didn't have money. They worked in each other's farms and
Mhm.
helping each other growing food and tackling different droughts or sort of
Mhm.
foods or anything. And Western colonization destroyed this way of living and this sense of individualism through education, through monetary system. It destroyed this sense of connectedness in those tribes. That's
Yeah.
why I just in comparison to this, it's amazing that this strong sense of community somehow integrated the Western perspective, but stayed true to its original
Mhm.
indigenous way of living.
Yes, and it's one thing I'll just mention quickly, but I feel some trepidation with offering too many details. So, growing up, of course, almost all my friends were Indigenous. Like if you see any pictures, as I recall, it's always, with Indigenous friends of mine, spending time in some of their homes, if not in the majority of their homes. Um, there's a lot of fallout, there's a lot of challenges because of the residential school system. So their parents were in the residential school system, most of them, meaning the impacts were quite devastating, and that leads to things like alcoholism. So I saw a lot of that. And there were things like my mom would say, if there's any drinking, come home. You have to leave right away. Because, I don't want to share it for the research purposes too much of this because it just offers an angle that is part of the reality, but I don't, maybe someone else might best share that from their own family systems than myself because um, just because I'm not indigenous to North America, but uh, that really impacts people. And that is a strong reality of what I grew up seeing. And so when you ask about the traditions being shared, and of course, there was a lot that was lived and experienced that is about connecting to the land. But the same friends today there's a resurgence where they are saying, this is my identity, this is who I am, and trying their very best to connect to the knowledges and the learnings that they actually lost when we were growing up. They didn't get so much from their parents for these reasons. And then also, because within the schools, there's a strong top-down sense of identity where, if you're coming from a marginalized community, um, you try to blend in as much as you can.
Mm.
So I'm observing a lot of these friends now. They're going back to those teachings of beading and sewing, and they're making a real effort now to really produce um, these markers of identity and these expressions of identity. Whereas when we grew up, we might be learning, but there wasn't a strong sense or need to do this. Now there's a strong sense or
Mhm.
need to revive these traditions and ensure that they continue.
Could you tell me more, of course, of what you know in this work of reviving the traditions and trying to, again, to save it and to protect these traditions and So the most important way in also, it should not become sort of the exotic of this place, just a tourist
Mhm.
attraction, but mostly that's one of the questions which arise has opened in many places in the world. How to stay true and connected to your uh, the cultural identity without
Mhm.
offending, with dignity, but being not against or opposing this dominant sort of
Mhm.
civilization and modern technologies or anything. But
Mhm.
how to, is it possible at all to find the way of uh, saving this diversity and
Mhm.
its richness without suppression and without competition or opposing?
Mm. Gosh. Well, everybody's at a different place on that journey. And I think when you begin to learn about colonization and understand more deeply how um, how you have been impacted or your family's been impacted, and uh, yeah, how your own culture. So in my case, also from the Jamaican side, how your own culture has successfully been erased, not only by the colonizers, but by your own doing because of shaming and the opportunities that are given when you are um, aligned to the dominant way of being and expressing oneself in the world. That's rewarded. Whereas when you express yourself in ways that are different, or are seen as technologically less advanced or more nature based, it's disrespected and it's seen as having no value. So to keep expressing yourself in those ways doesn't get yourself ahead. And if you're thinking about your family, you're thinking about your children. So in my case, where my grandparents, not so much my grandparents, because I think my grandparents were quite strong in advocating for the marginalized. They were extremely vocal. But, and I don't know how much to put this in a recording or in publication because it's a bit sensitive, but where I would say the next generation, my mom's generation, fully adopted more dominant ways of doing things so that their kids, meaning my generation, could have a better chance, could get ahead in life and be given opportunities. It's not only done to you, you actually play into it and facilitate it. Um, yeah, so the examples here again would be separating from learnings that were passed down because those were seen as backward or from the bush or or having no relevance in the modern world or something to be laughed at. So there's different ways of making sure that your children don't continue those traditions and ways of expressing oneself because the wider world doesn't appreciate it and the wider world will suppress it. So you want your kids to survive, you want them to thrive and move forward. You make sure they forget. So I'm speaking more of where I'm trying to learn what to reclaim, but it's the same thing in the global north among indigenous communities where oftentimes children have tried to blend in. And now there's a resurgence among their children where they're singing their songs, they're reciting their songs together in their own communities and practicing their arts and traditions on purpose. Um, the bigger challenge to do so. So I grew up hunting and fishing and doing all these things. The challenge is some of these animals are becoming, the word is not extinct, but they're way harder to find today. So to teach your children among the indigenous communities how to fish and how to smoke the fish and harvest in certain ways so that you have food over the winters, this is becoming harder to teach because the opportunities have been taken away, let's say, due to overfishing, and not just in, it's hard because it's not just in the Yukon, it's also the United States or Alaska. And of course, animals don't know boundaries. So the salmon run through Alaska, run through the Yukon or Canada, and if they're overfished in the ocean by one country, the US, then there's very little we can do. Very recently, we started having, the government started having more conversations around how to collaborate, but for years, it's been without conversation.
Mm.
So these are the impacts on the ability of culture to be practiced because you need the opportunities to be able to do so. And, another example for what I just mentioned in terms of passing down traditions of what's valued, languages are becoming extinct for Indigenous peoples because they're not valued by the dominant system. Um, and so then the children don't want to learn because if something is hard to practice because there's very few speakers and it's just not valued in the systems in which we live. I mean, we have English and we have French. Then you have to put in extra effort to learn and hold on to those languages. And so there's a real fear among some communities that languages will die out.
Mm.
And so I have friends and colleagues, students as well, who are trying to revive their languages and learn their languages and just find funding and ways of ensuring that they can continue.
And what about some cultural practices such as again you mentioned sewing or uh, other crafts or even about stories? What about some myths, legends, some fairy tales or
Yeah,
something? Are
yeah.
there any? Is there any work in trying to somehow preserve it and make
Mhm,
how to say made it available for younger generations?
mhm. Yeah, so a lot of the stories were passed down orally, as you know, and more recently, as part of the resurgence, there's these stories are coming out in print. And not only for adults. Now, you have many stories coming out, not many, but you have more stories coming out for children being published. So that's
Mhm.
a way, and it's not just for Indigenous children, it's for children in general to learn.
Yeah. Do you know, or maybe could you remember some stories from from the families of from the elders of your indigenous friends, which were about the Yukon, the land, maybe some spirits or some mythical creatures who lived in in the bushes or something. So something which can uh, show this. Sense of land of this territory, maybe some traits of culture, something which interests you in
I,
child.
I I don't remember stories in general from the space in which I grew up, but there are a couple stories that have become popular through this transmission today that I've learned, I would say more later in life. And one is a popular one. Well, I say popular, but the vast majority of people don't know it, is the one of Sky Woman. Do you know it at all? No? Okay. It's of course, these stories are not in all West Coast Indigenous nations stories, but more so, I think, within BC from where I am. And it's about, of course, there's different origin stories, and this one is where a woman falls from the sky, and her name is Sky Woman, and she's pregnant also with a daughter, and that daughter continues. And so I don't want to make mistakes with explaining the whole story, but Sky Woman is one of the key origin stories that is told and shared through publications today. Um, I have a bunch of books in front of me now. I'm sure I could pull one and share with you the chapter of this of where to find it. At least that might offer some guidance with it.
Yeah,
Here's one.
you can share just as you remember, and then we can
Yeah.
apply it in the text in the proper way. Yeah.
So Braiding Sweet Grass is one story that begins with, one book rather, that begins with Sky Woman. And yeah, she has, it's written by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I've met Robin as well before. Do you know the book, Braiding Sweetgrass? It is a beautiful, beautiful book. So yeah, so the first chapter is on Sky Woman. Um, yeah, it's part of our origin story. There's another story that is quite popular on the West Coast as well about, and I'm trying to remember the name of the entity, but it's of a kind of mm, not a Bigfoot per se. It's some kind of, yeah, it's like a Bigfoot, but it's not the same species of an individual that represents man and represents man's evil aspects. But it's a being, so it's a thing that we could also have compassion, mercy for. And the teaching with that, as I connect to that teaching or understand it, is to be wary of the dark parts of us, but to be mindful of what can also create fear within us and find ways to overcome that fear. So in the face of such evil, we might have courage, but to be vigilant and aware, but also to have awareness that it is a part of us. And so, we are to have compassion for it as well. Um, there's quite a few stories where I grew up, and also I think, across North America in general, but where I grew up in the Yukon, about such beings. And you know, this includes Bigfoot, or what we might call Sasquatch. And to also have understanding and respect for these beings, and that they might carry some messages when we sense them. And some Indigenous people see them. Of course, these things have never, scientifically been proven to exist, or where, any clear pictures have been taken and that kind of thing. But there's a strong belief among most Indigenous people within the spaces I've grown up, where these beings, some of them are large and some of them are very tiny. They exist, and they might be more in a spirit form, but they are beings all around us.
Mm. So, do they are they just exist, or do they just exist, or do they mean something, or as maybe some prediction, or do they tell something to those people, or that's just they're part of nature and sort of acknowledge that they exist, at least in the folklore?
As for them, they wouldn't call it folklore because it's a part of reality.
Mhm.
I don't know if there is a specific wisdom or one specific learning that would be taken from connecting or their appearance, but perhaps different depending on who you are and what you need at that time, different learnings. Um, one learning is the vision quest. Do you know what that is? The vision quest? Okay. So on the vision quest, I did that not this, was it? Yeah, Saturday. I did a little tiny vision quest. But the original bigger teaching is you take at least 3 days and you go out in the wilderness and you go with the intent of gaining some wisdom or knowledge from the beings that are in the wilderness. And, the beings can be represented through plants or trees or rocks or anything created. But I think typically there is not an apparition, but a spirit that could be the Sasquatch, or it could be one of these spiritual beings presenting itself to you with some kind of message. So it is specific to you. And there's some learning, and it's going in with courage, not fear, and overcoming again that fear to connect and learn what you need to. Maybe it comes in other forms, like a bird, a certain kind of bird. And on my Saturday, my connection was with a crow, and I still haven't looked up. So what I could do is look up the meaning of connecting with a crow. And there's a lot of resources online that can help. So I still haven't done that, but I had in my quest the the desire to learn, to just know what I needed to learn, what's something I need to know. And that was presented to me. And it was just a clear sense of, because there's so many different birds and so many different insects and, all sorts of things that you become aware of on that kind of quest. And maybe there's more than one that has a meaning. But for me, I just had a real strong sense because the crow had, I was just sitting and watching, and first of all, I didn't see the crow. I heard the crow trying to crack open some shells, and then I saw it was a crow. And then later, the crow came very, very close to me, like literally 4 or 5 feet away from me twice, and that's quite rare for being out in the wilderness, for a crow to come that close. So my strong sense is it was the crow that had a message for me. And so I still have to look up what that message could be. But there's different interpretations of what that vision quest. Some Indigenous teachers and elders are very strict about what that vision quest should look like and all the steps you need to take towards it. So some will say you can't be with somebody else, you must be alone. You can't talk to anyone else. It should be at least 3 days, and it needs to be overnight. And you can't have a shelter. You need to be sleeping outside. Maybe you have blankets and that kind of thing, but it's outside so that you overcome that fear of connecting with nature in darkness. Um, you go quite far, so you walk, and you open up all your senses of smell, sight, everything. And, I've done it, several, not a ton of times, but several times, where you begin to really hear more and more and more as you just be. And sometimes I just close my eyes and I hear, like 5 different kinds of birds, or I try to count. And and then some other people say you can, it can just be 2, 3, 4 hours. It doesn't have to be overnight. And so that's probably a newer interpretation, but that's a much more benevolent, um, offering of how to do it and still connect. And so on my Saturday, I probably did it for about 4 hours only. It wasn't much. But yeah, so that's another teaching of how to connect and how to gain knowledge. So it's not knowledge passed down by a human necessarily, it's knowledge passed down or shared across from other beings that are non-human or more than human.
Yeah, it's invaluable, I think, definitely.
Hmm.
And thank you for sharing. I think that that's really a great way to return to the how to say, no, not to the roots, but to the core.
Hmm.
So what we uh, have been sometime very uh, long ago. Yeah, I think that that's definitely what modern humans should really on maybe remember how to do it and what it gives to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very valuable.
I
Steph,
believe I believe we're all indigenous from thousands of years ago, but most of us have lost our way, and we can learn from those who are indigenous today and um, have reclaimed their understanding and their connection. Because again, I think it's epigenetics. I think it's not fully lost if we can just take the steps and make the intention to reconnect. And it's all about reconnecting and it's all about remembering. And what I've learned from um, some of the elders and some of the teachings directly is the goal is to remember. And what we need to do is to remember. And, as I mentioned, growing up with a lot of my friends who are Indigenous, the challenge was because of the residential schools, the remembering piece was not there. It was not encouraged. Um, and many parents were maybe not able to teach it anymore. So I don't want to, I think if someone else described it a little bit more, that would be more appropriate, but it was a strong observation growing up. And so now my friends are reconnecting because of that loss. The residential schools were schools that purposely cut children off from their culture and identity and wisdoms and teachings, just basic teachings such as hunting or teachings about, their creator, um, or valuing themselves, and, and through not providing a child dignity and respect and love. Um, the impact could be trying to separate yourself from those things. And so now there's a reclaiming with a lot of pain and healing that needs to happen still, obviously, and probably for generations because the impacts are strong.
yeah. And another challenge, as far as I understand, is to somehow remember and reconnect to this source of indigenous culture. Because again, if parents didn't practice it or grandparents have passed away, it's rather difficult to return to this knowledge and to
Mhm.
how to regain it and to
Mhm.
continue it for our children and for further generations.
Well, when you don't have the way to reconnect, and there's been a lot of harm done, there's just so many layers of barriers to get through to get back. It's not just simply learning, it's healing while reconnecting. And yeah, there's lots that needs to be supported.
Mm. Is it still not encouraged to be proud of the the story and the culture of indigenous people, or has it changed in the past several years, decades maybe?
There's still strong discrimination.
Mm.
Yeah, it's very strong still.
So in this case, what might be the best way? Maybe let's maybe envisage or dream of some good way of future, for example, in 20 years and 20,
Mm,
for example, I don't know that, 2050, 2050, what might be the best vision of this West Coast, Yukon, maybe British
mm,
Columbia, of how it might be
mm,
different in these years.
mhm. Um, so when someone graduates with a PhD, for example, from an Indigenous background, um, one way is to support that person into academia, into a role, into a position where they are passing down knowledge and teachings and wisdoms, not only that they have learned throughout their PhD, but from their own ancestry. So it's giving space. It's a very hard thing to do when right now there are very few, I don't know how much you're aware in North America. I think I've mentioned this to you as well before, but our universities are being economically challenged for many reasons, and there's fewer and fewer jobs for academics. So to give space really requires courage, it requires money, funding, and just political will. So my thinking is universities is a space, schools where children are young and they're beginning to learn about life in the world and how to connect to nature or not. Within the school system, teachers who are Indigenous would be well placed there as well. Politics. We've had very, very, very few people within politics that have been able to rise up because the opportunities or barriers are there, are so barriers are there, opportunities not so much. But these are places of influence and power, right? So when you're influencing people's understanding and learning and how they perceive the world, when you're influencing policy or actual laws, or turning over laws that discriminate, it can only happen through the court systems or government positions. And these are the spaces where I think these need to be encouraged some more.
Mm. What
It's
about,
really, yeah, go
okay, no,
ahead.
no, no, please continue.
It's really hard, like a friend of mine was saying, because my son is thinking about going into law school. She said, why doesn't he go into, because there's an indigenous law school that we have here in the city. And my reaction to her, if I think about it, I think she was offended. Um, I said, really? He would have a chance if he went through that? That was my reply. And it's because, of course, I want my son to succeed. If he's going to spend 3 years again going back to university, investing probably from me the money, um, and um, the long hours and all that it takes, I want to see him get a job from that. So that's the position as, my parents had when they're thinking, what is the best route? And I'm probably doing the same thing as the generation ahead of me, where you're looking for the opportunities for your children. Now, if he went through such a program, he's uplifting Indigenous ways of being and knowing. He's giving opportunities because he's facilitating that knowledge. Um, but because of discrimination still, and I'm thinking economically, I want my child to do well. my quick response was, do you really think that would be good for him? You know, it's challenging because you need people in who are graduating from law school who are able to bring this knowledge forward and these teachings forward. But you're also taking a risk
Yeah.
on a personal level.
Yes, I see. What
Mhm.
about festivals or maybe some cultural practices which can sort of inspire people to cherish it more, to value this, again to share this with the whole world, because it's
Absolutely. Yeah.
so. Are there any things which are sort of on purpose are aimed on promoting this culture, this knowledge, this sort of crafts or something? Because again, this gives people, indigenous people, this proudness and self-value and understanding
Hmm.
they are
Hmm.
worth, they are heard, they are valuable for the whole society.
Yeah. I would, I mean, I don't know statistically, but I would say that there are more craft shows today than there was when I was growing up, way more. So there is definitely a push to be able to do these kinds of things and find opportunities for sure.
Yeah, it would be interesting to speak with such people who maybe are particularly focused on promoting, yes, the way is to promote culture, to promote these ideas, to promote traditions, to
Mhm.
promote values, to make them valuable and make them
Mhm.
appreciated by all the society, by all people.
I think there's a push. So for example, the one day conference I invited you to for global leadership in September, we're introducing also Indigenous approaches. And for that, I'll just share with you my thinking or my way of doing things is um, the opening panel of three people, one of them is Indigenous. So I make sure that the opening panel, because that is a position of power,
Mhm.
and you get anyone who's selected for an opening plenary, people expect that person is going to be the person to listen to. So just by placing a person in that slot gives them the opportunity to speak. Doesn't mean the other your panel or the other panels are any less relevant. Um, but the opening is important.
Yes.
The there's another panel where I have um, an Indigenous woman speaking. I have so part of the celebration of that day is our 10-year anniversary for our Global Leadership Program. So I'm inviting five alumni. I've invited four, and I just have a sense of just waiting on the fifth. I don't know who the fifth is, but I made sure to invite among the four a Métis woman, and she's strong and she's got a real strong sense of teaching and in a very equitable and inclusive way. So she's one of the four. And the moderator is a PhD student who is Indigenous from Alaska. So these are our places, positions. So just these tiny, tiny little things of her being the moderator where she can facilitate and she can, if there's anything said that she can grab onto and, lift up, she's in that position to do so, not marginalize it, that whatever needs to be uplifted. And maybe it's not something Indigenous, maybe there's something else related to global politics or issues that need to be centered. But she's in that position to do so. So these are the little efforts I make. And I collaborate with colleagues frequently to uplift Indigenous knowledges. That's what I do to ensure that voices are centered, knowledges are centered.
Thank you
So
for
there's,
the. Yeah, it would be great to maybe somehow to connect to them and to to speak to them and to give them platform to share
Hmm.
perspective and their experience and their understanding of everything.
Absolutely. And when you hear them, so when you hear Erin, for example, in the opening, her voice is so beautiful, her wisdom is so vast. And yeah, people just need to hear.
So my last question would be about a vision experience, or how is it called, this practice of going into the bushes and observing the
Vision Quest.
vision quest, vision quest.
Mhm.
So, what might be the vision quest for the whole humanity in terms of observing the west coast of Canada? So, what might we, as a humanity, observe and find out and learn from this territory? What this land can show us or bring us some message?
I think, um, hmm, I think the learning, and I want to be careful about interpreting because it's not my culture. I practice it, but it's what I've learned to practice. In other words, I think what benefit, let me put it that way, could be could be gained is connecting to place wherever you are. So wherever you are, allowing yourself to learn from nature, not just humans. Humans have gone in different directions. Um, but by connecting to, if you're just sitting on the grass, a bee, connecting to a flower with its scent, its beauty, the way it's been shaped, it's any other messages or senses you get. I think that's taking guidance, and we've forgotten that guidance comes from more than humans. And that's an indigenous teaching. Wisdoms don't just come from humans, it comes from beings, it comes from plants, it comes from animals. And so animals can be our guides, our teachers. But we have to go out. So as part of that vision quest is we have to take the steps to go out with the intention to learn. Our approach is to teach. Our approach is to, in general, I'm speaking to dominate. We know best because we're humans. We think we have the greatest intelligence just by being human. But there's many intelligences out there that we can learn from.
So true.
Yeah. So I think the learning, to answer your question, is to open ourselves up and allow ourselves to be guided by the more than human and take the actual steps to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for I think it was a very valuable conversation. I myself have so much things to think over,
Hmm.
and it's this practice. It's so we definitely can take it not literally to go to the wood for 3 days, but again, having the courage to face the unknown, to somehow surrender to the to the environment which is bigger than you, to be so attentive and to to use all your senses to try to find something which is beyond your understanding and your constantly jumping thoughts.
Hmm.
It's an invaluable practice, I would say.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's really really very valuable
Hmm. Hmm.
and
I'll just
to
add,
some extent
hmm?
humbling humbling
Yes,
practice.
yes. Yeah, if you observe a blade of grass and you touch it and you smell it and get closer to it, you're not going to trample all over and that kind of thing um, after spending that time with it,
Yeah,
you would think.
definitely.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely wonderful.
I hope, yeah. So I'm glad if this has been helpful.
Yeah. Yes, and I hope you also had some pleasant moments in sort of remembering. So again, please, if you find some give me some links to the stories. Maybe we could interpret
Hmm.
this
I
structure
will. Okay.
or something in order to be more precise and maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, this would be wonderful. And I will make the draft of the article and will send it to you for approval.
Okay.
Maybe end of this week or maybe next week. Yeah,
Okay. Sounds great.
yeah,
And
great.
I connected you to my student.
Yes, yes, please.
Oh, did you not receive it?
No, I haven't received it. So
Oh,
when
okay.
did you send it? Uh,
Maybe I sent it to a wrong email of yours.